I'd just like to say, express a real debt of gratitude to Mark. Mark and I met about a year and a half ago, and we started to talk. And my wife Rana, who's here, who really, her and our team organized this. I didn't do anything. We started to talk about ways we could make Miami and Miami Beach better, because we spend about half the year here. And Mark just said, let's do something together. I mean, it was one of the sweetest, nicest things. And he said, we have this place at Miami Beach. I had no idea there was an urban studio here. I should have known. And you can have an office there. And I wrote a lot of my new book. I'll talk a little bit. I wrote a lot of my new book in that office right over there. And then Ken Furton has been, the provost here, has been so incredibly generous. My dear friend Brian Schreiner, this is really a part of his entire portfolio. And lots of great things happening at the school. And then John Stewart, who runs this on a day-to-day basis. And all my great colleagues. It's funny, in that hallway where our offices are as visiting fellows, 2 of the 3 or 4 of us knew each other before. It was pretty funny. There must have been a method in your madness. And then my team, Rana, this is really her brainchild. You'll hear from her later. She does all the hard work, so I get to write and think. And then Reham and Stephen, who helped working with the FIU team to put this all together. So, Mark laid it out. On the one hand, and for those of us, especially so many of us are here from Toronto, where we spend half the year, when you look around America today, and you look around at the gun violence, that's just terrifying and plagues our society. And then you think about this anti-immigration rhetoric that we hear. And you think those are 2 things that really, I tweeted this today, those are 2 things that could really threaten this country and threaten this country's ability to attract talent and to be competitive. And I think, I wrote Rise of the Creative Class right after the attacks on New York City. I'm from Newark, New Jersey. And in writing that book, all of these big global issues, even though it's about cities, were in my mind. And I think the basic narrative, folks, is that, as you said it, the real force of positive energy in the world, the real force that is going to carry us forward, the real force that is the tenor of our times, isn't the dark gloom and doom stuff. It's the fact that human creativity powers our economy. And human creativity is not an exclusive good. In fact, it's the most inclusive good. Because every single little boy and girl, every one of us, creativity doesn't accept the social categories of race, gender, ethnicity, mental ability, disability, all the bullshit we have imposed on ourselves as human beings. Creativity requires diversity. And so I think that is the shining ray of hope. And of course, when you look around at what's messed up in the world, you can look at what's great. And really, if you think about what humankind's greatest achievement is, art and technology, innovation, all of these things that we pay tribute to, but they come from what is really our greatest achievement, our cities. Our cities are the greatest thing that we have ever built. They're the things that endure. They're the things that propagate the innovation and technology and arts and culture. It all comes from, even if you scroll back through human history and you look at where the first tools were developed or the first cave paintings, our first attempts at poetry, they all came out of the then densest small communities of our time. So what the idea of today's conversation is it's part of a bigger project that our teams together, the FIU team and our team at the Creative Class Group, put together on kind of thinking about how Miami navigates this terrain. And we want to talk a little bit about Miami and how it compares to other cities and the role of cities in arts, culture. And what better, with Art Basel here, what better time to engage a group of really smart and creative people from design, from interior design, from architecture, from music, from arts, from culture. What better time to engage that conversation? And one of the things that's happening in the world that I like to write about and talk about is, some people think in this great global world economy that we're in, that somehow the world has become flat. That somehow, with technology, with the internet, with social media, the world has become flattened out and you can plug and play from anywhere. But in fact, the defining force of our time is that the world isn't flat at all. The world is in fact more clustered and concentrated. People have packed themselves into cities more than at any time in human history. In the United States, about 80 or 85% of the wealth of this country is produced by its large cities and metro areas. There's roughly a dozen mega regions, the New York, Boston, Washington corridor, Southern Florida, this area from Miami to Tampa to Orlando, Northern California, Southern California, the area that stretches from Buffalo to Toronto or Vancouver to Seattle. I can go on. That produces about 90% of our GDP. So in fact, cities have become more important. And what's really interesting to me, and it'd be great to talk with others about this, the book I'm working on is called The New Urban Crisis. And interesting for someone who works on creativity. And the theme of that book is just when our cities have reurbanized, just when our cities have come back, just when talented and creative people have moved back to cities, just when we have a great inversion and the suburbs are starting to decline and the cities are coming back, our great cities face a series of deep and fundamental challenges, maybe greater than any before. You know, if you live in New York or London or even greater Miami, housing is becoming much less affordable. The MBA students I teach in Toronto, many of you might not be that familiar with Toronto. You don't think of it in the same league as New York or London. The MBA students I teach there to a person says they cannot afford a home. And the only way they can afford a home is if they can go to the bank of mom and dad. You look at the unaffordability of houses of places like New York or London or Los Angeles or San Francisco. The growth in inequality that's happened in this country and around the world. The splitting apart, which is not hard to understand. You know, if a third of us have the great good fortune to be members of this creative class, we work in science and technology and arts and culture, design, entertainment, media, professions, we teach at universities, we work in hospitals. That means 66% of us don't. And the simple fact of our economic divide is that it's not the 1% versus the rest. It's that we have a very advantaged core of people like us in this room and 66% of other people who can't find work that's family supporting. My dad worked in a factory for his entire life. He had a 7th grade education. You know, he told me that when he came back from World War II, as if by magic, his job had turned into a good job. He could buy a home and support his family and put his 3 boys to school. But for service workers and the kind of work that's in Miami, those people are sinking further and further behind. Miami's a really interesting place to look at all of this from because it's an incredibly aspiring city. You know, we were talking today with some reporters who were covering this in Art Basel and saying, look at the number of cranes, look at the amount of building, look at the amount of construction on the beach, and then look at, well, however we define downtown Miami. You know, it's this big elongated stretch. It's not just the commercial core, but it's Brickell, and it's downtown, and it's Flagler, and it's Wynwood, and it's the Design District, and it's Edgewater, and it's this stretched out thing. Cranes all over the place. And it's an incredibly aspirational place, but yet, and a place where a lot of wealth is coming, a place where a tremendous, well, look, we're here this week, ungodly sums of global wealth are coming, and not just to events like Art Basel. More and more people are deciding to make this their home. Some are tired of the cold, some are tired of the housing prices, some want a better place to raise their family, some want sunnier weather, some are escaping all sorts of things in the places they grew up. But still Miami faces a set of challenges. And so what we're going to do this year, today and this year, is we're going to actually document the extent of the development of the creative economy here and the extent of the strength and assets and the liabilities and the weaknesses. You know, on the strong side, Miami is a center of global trade and commerce. I mean, it's so self-evidently one of the great global cities with a great global airport that you can get in and out from anywhere. It obviously has attracted an incredible amount of wealth, and it has incredible real estate development going on. But if you look around and you compare Miami to other cities that we'll be talking about, whether that's Paris or Toronto or New York or London or San Francisco, the creative class here is still not as developed as it should be. And maybe that's because we haven't supported our universities enough. Maybe that's because the linkages that Mark is starting to forge in his leadership with the Chamber are just developing. But the creative class in Miami, in contrast to San Francisco where it's 40%, Toronto where it's 35%, New York where it's 38%, it's only about 25% of our local working population. So it's something that we really need to grapple with. And a lot of Miami's creative economy is imported. It's imported in here, and it comes in here, and it stays for a bit, and then it moves off. So, but that's a challenge for the city. How do you take the assets that are being attracted here and glue them and lock them in? And we're fortunate. We're fortunate that having met Mark and developed a partnership with FIU, we've become part of this. Well, that means about 75% of the working population of Miami is either doing low-wage blue-collar work, but more likely to be in the service economy. They're the people who take care of you in your hotel. They're the people who take care of your house or your condominium. They're the people who take care of your kids, your aging parents. They're the people who work in all the shops and all the restaurants. And so Miami, as much as any other city in the world, has this divided economy. And those folks, if members of the creative class make 70 or 80 or 90, 100,000 on average, members of this service class, the people who are the infrastructure that we stand on, make 20 or 30 grand. It takes 2 or 3 people to make a family wage. So that divide, in particular, one of the things we're going to be focusing on in our project, which we think is a big opportunity for Miami, because Miami, with the cruise lines and the major hotel chains and all of the action in the restaurants, Miami is a perfect laboratory for how you upgrade service work. It is an incredible laboratory for how you take routine service work and infuse it with creativity. Infuse it with people who can make jobs better, can innovate on their service floor, like in great factories when they work together to make products better and make processes more efficient. Miami is an incredible laboratory to do this. But the real objective of today is to talk about how Miami and other cities can leverage this human creativity. Every single human being is creative. And if you look at what's really interesting about the American urban experience, people hear the words creative class, they hear the thing of innovation, and they immediately think PhD, rocket scientist, white lab code, in a laboratory, high levels of education. And yeah, that matters. But who are the most important innovators of the past several decades in American history? Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, Paul Allen, Bill Gates. A few of them, well, actually none of them finished college. They went to college. Many of them were college dropouts. So education is important, and for a regular person like us, of course you want to go and get a good university degree and go to college. But my point is that creativity extends beyond education. And when we go to the cutting edges of technology, the most important technological innovations, we find people with fabulous PhD educations working in laboratories in places like Google and social media, and we find people with drive and ambition. But if you look at the creative spark in the American urban experience, and you look at where creativity comes from, it comes as often just from the streets. And this is the kind of thing we want to talk about. It's not exclusive. In fact, it's inclusive. When you look at the most important innovations that have come out of music and the arts and culture, Andy Warhol, Louis Armstrong, Jimi Hendrix, I could go on. I mean, I could go on. Jay-Z, Kanye West, we all have our examples of this. But it comes from this incredible mixing and clashing of people in diverse urban environments. And I'm not the person who discovered this. The person who discovered this was an older woman who I became friends with when we moved to Toronto. Her name was Jane Jacobs. And Jane and I, she had a little house in a neighborhood called the Annex in Toronto. And in her 80s, I would go over there and talk with her. And one day, I asked her, what do you think your most important discovery was? She was so humble and so self-effacing. She said, well, I think I figured out something that puzzled all economists. But I don't want to brag about it, but I think I figured out something that's really stymied people like you, Richard. And I said, well, you have to tell me about that. What was it? She said, well, most economists, when you really push them, think that economies grow because they make a little division of labor. And they break these tasks down into their most minute components, and they have a factory and scientific management and an assembly line and people working like a Charlie Chaplin cog in the machine. And she said, that's a great theory of how you make things more efficient. But it tells you nothing about how you create an innovation. And if you want to understand how economies grow, they grow by innovating. It's these great things that are great cultural moments, great intellectual moments, great technological moments that are the force that drive economies forward. And she said, that doesn't come from companies. That comes from all of these strange and different kinds of people who find themselves moving to cities. They might or might not know one another. They form friendships, they form bonds, they form partnerships. Some of those partnerships go on. They form musical bands. Many of them fail. You know, Steve Jobs and Jack White said the same thing. What makes a great city? It's where people come to meet to form companies, where people come to meet to form musical acts. And many of those fail, and some of them succeed, but out of that incredible mixing pot comes something new and different. So really, as cities are our critical resource. And just back to Miami for a minute. We evaluate cities based on 3 simple metrics we call the 3 T's. That's what really motivates a city economy. And Miami overlooks its most important T, just for the Miamians of us. You know, Miami is all about now we have to make our technology community stronger. And that's absolutely true. We do, and we are. And with FIU and other great universities, it's happening. With the startup community, it's happening in Wynwood Rails. But Miami ranks about 100th out of 300 metropolitan areas across the United States in technology. And then people say, well, it's all about talent, and it's about highly educated talent and human capital. And Miami does okay, but it ends up about 120th. The third T is the one where Miami excels. And I hope to God people get this. Tolerance. In our view, the actual thing that propagates really innovative cities' economies, I taught in Pittsburgh for 20 years, and Pittsburgh excelled in technology, but the technology and the talent it produced went to other places. Tolerance, diversity, a melting pot, a mosaic, the ability to have people across the spectrum, welcome them in and fuse them to your community. Miami ranks second. It's like Toronto, or New York, or Vancouver, or London, or San Francisco. It's in the absolute upper tiers, and one of the things this community has to learn is that that very fact of openness and inclusiveness and the ability to attract people, the gay community, the lesbian community, the Latin community, the Asian community, the Muslim I mean, it's all here. The Hasidic community. You can't name a community that isn't here. And part of an interesting and vibrant melting pot, or the word I like better, which actually derives from the Canadian discourse, a mosaic. When we look at cities, we are convinced. We are convinced that these tolerance factors, diversity factors, quality of place factors power economic growth. We created 2 indexes, got us in a lot of trouble. Academics went nuts and called us heretics. A gay and lesbian index. We found that places that have a large and vibrant gay and lesbian community propagate the kind of conditions that lead to economic growth. A bohemian and artistic index. In fact, Stephen, who's sitting here, just with his students at NYU, recently did the analysis. We not only looked at economic growth, folks, for all of you who care about this, we looked at hotel room occupancy, we looked at hotel room revenue growth, we looked at a variety of measures that propagate really vibrant travel and tourism industries. The gay index and the artistic and bohemian index predicted that better than just about anything else we could throw at the wall. So the point of the fact is that we really need to understand what cities do. We need to understand cities as incubators of arts and culture. We need to pick the brains, and we're so lucky to have them here during this great Art Basel event, of great designers and musicians, not just policy wonks like me and like us. We need to really sit and have what better place to have this dialogue between urbanists and city builders and designers and musicians and artistic creatives than here at Miami at this point in time. So those are my opening remarks, and the rest of this is going to be fantastic, and I think Stephen is going to help MC us through at least part of the rest of the afternoon. So thanks very much.